Good morning. I have an appointment. I'll be happy to wait.
Good morning. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly.
Thank you.
Good morning, Captain Brooks. Welcome.
Good morning, Commander Hayes.
We've been expecting your arrival. Captain?
Kara?
Please welcome Captain Naomi Brooks.
Every person who walks through our doors should feel respected before they ask for help.
That's a simple idea, but a powerful one.
Professional excellence begins.
The police station lobby fell strangely quiet the moment the young woman stepped through the front doors. It wasn't because she had made a scene. It was because no one noticed her at all. Monday mornings inside Chicago's 12th district were always chaotic. Patrol officers hurried between briefing rooms carrying coffee cups and stacks of reports. Detectives argued over case files near the evidence counter. Dispatch radios crackled constantly as new calls echoed through the building. People moved with purpose. No one had time to look twice at a woman wearing a faded gray hoodie, dark jeans, white sneakers, and a simple black backpack slung over one shoulder. Naomi Brooks quietly walked toward the reception desk. She appeared to be in her early 30s. Calm. Composed. Her dark curls were tied into a neat bun beneath a plain baseball cap. There was nothing about her appearance that suggested authority. No badge displayed. No uniform. No insignia. Only a slim black folder tucked beneath her arm. Behind the front desk, Lieutenant Daniel Harris barely glanced up from his computer. Morning. Naomi smiled politely. Good morning. I have an appointment. Without asking her name, Harris pointed toward a row of plastic chairs against the wall. Take a seat. We'll get to you. Naomi nodded. Thank you. She quietly sat down. Around her, people continued rushing through the lobby. A young officer hurried past carrying body camera equipment. Two detectives discussed an overnight burglary. A family waited anxiously to file a report. Nearly 20 minutes passed. No one spoke to Naomi again. She simply observed. Every greeting, every conversation, every expression. An elderly veteran wearing a military jacket entered the station. Officer Melissa Grant immediately stood. Good morning, sir. Can I help you? The veteran smiled. Thank you. A businessman arrived moments later wearing an expensive Navy suit. Lieutenant Harris walked around the counter himself. Welcome. Please come right this way. Naomi watched quietly, then looked down at the notebook resting inside her folder. She wrote only 6 words. First impressions determine first treatment. She closed the notebook. Another 15 minutes passed. A rookie officer carrying paperwork slowed as he walked by. He glanced toward Naomi. You waiting on somebody? Yes. I have a meeting. He nodded absent-mindedly. Someone will call you. Then he disappeared into another hallway. Still, no one asked her name. No one asked why she was there. Across the lobby, 2 officers chatted beside the coffee machine. One looked toward Naomi. You think she's here to file a complaint? The other shrugged. Probably. Looks like she's been waiting forever. Neither approached her. Naomi simply folded her hands together. Her expression never changed. She wasn't offended. She wasn't impatient. She was learning. Exactly 47 minutes after she first walked inside, Lieutenant Harris finally looked toward the waiting area. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, you're still here. Naomi smiled. Yes, sir. I believe so. He frowned. What was your name again? Before Naomi could answer, the station doors swung open with surprising force. Conversation throughout the lobby stopped almost instantly. Heavy boots echoed across the polished floor. 5 members of the regional SWAT team entered the building wearing black tactical uniforms. Behind them walked Commander Robert Hayes, a decorated veteran with more than 30 years in tactical operations. Every officer inside the station instinctively stood straighter. Several offered respectful greetings. Morning, Commander. Hayes acknowledged them with a nod as he continued walking. Then, he suddenly stopped. His eyes settled on the woman sitting quietly in the waiting area. For a heartbeat, the entire lobby seemed to freeze. Without hesitation, Commander Hayes changed direction. He walked directly toward Naomi. Lieutenant Harris looked confused. The younger officers exchanged puzzled glances. Hayes stopped in front of her. Then, in one smooth motion, the veteran commander stood perfectly at attention. The room became silent. His voice carried clearly across the station. "Good morning, Captain Brooks. It is an honor to finally welcome you." Every face in the lobby turned toward the young woman in the gray hoodie. Naomi slowly stood. She returned the salute with calm professionalism. Then Commander Hayes asked the question that instantly drained the color from Lieutenant Harris's face. "Captain, what rank would you like the department to address you by today?" The silence inside the 12th District Police Station lingered for several long seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. Commander Robert Hayes remained standing at attention in front of the woman everyone had ignored for nearly an hour. Lieutenant Daniel Harris felt his stomach tighten. The officers near the reception desk exchanged confused glances. Surely this had to be some misunderstanding. The woman in the gray hoodie didn't look like a SWAT captain. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She carried no visible badge. She had waited quietly like any ordinary visitor. Then Naomi Brooks smiled. Not proudly. Not triumphantly. Simply with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, Commander Hayes." She returned his salute before lowering her hand. "It's good to see you again." Hayes relaxed his posture. "We've been expecting you." Naomi glanced around the lobby. "I wanted to arrive a little differently." Several officers looked even more confused. Hayes understood immediately. A small smile crossed his weathered face. "So, today wasn't just an introduction." Naomi gently shook her head. "No, sir. It was an observation." The words settled heavily across the room. Lieutenant Harris suddenly remembered every minute she had spent sitting alone. Every unanswered question. Every assumption. Every opportunity the station had missed. Naomi slowly removed her baseball cap. Her neatly tied curls caught the morning light streaming through the station windows. She then reached inside her backpack and removed a slim leather credential wallet. Opening it calmly, she displayed her identification. Captain Naomi Brooks, Regional Tactical Operations Division. Special Operations Command. Newly appointed Commanding Officer for Interagency Tactical Standards. The badge reflected softly beneath the fluorescent lights. No one questioned it. No one needed to. Commander Hayes addressed the room. "Captain Brooks will oversee leadership evaluations, operational readiness, and community professionalism throughout this district." He paused. "Her review begins today." The air inside the lobby seemed noticeably heavier. A rookie officer quietly lowered the coffee cup in his hand. Someone near the report desk cleared his throat. Lieutenant Harris stepped away from the reception counter. His confidence had disappeared. "Captain Brooks." Naomi gently interrupted him. "It's all right, Lieutenant. You didn't know who I was." Harris nodded slowly. "No, I didn't." Naomi closed her credential wallet. "And that's exactly why I dress this way." Several officers exchanged uncertain looks. She continued calmly. "If I'd walked in wearing dress blues, everyone would have greeted me. If I'd arrived surrounded by command staff, someone would have opened the door before I touched it." She looked around the station. "But that's not the experience every citizen receives." Her voice remained soft. Yet every sentence landed with unmistakable weight. "I wanted to see this building through someone else's eyes." The lobby fell silent again. Officer Melissa Grant quietly reflected on the elderly veteran she had welcomed earlier. She realized something uncomfortable. She had greeted him warmly because his military jacket immediately commanded respect. She hadn't even noticed Naomi sitting nearby. Commander Hayes folded his hands behind his back. "I told Captain Brooks she could announce herself the moment she arrived." He smiled faintly. "She chose not to." Naomi nodded. "Respect that depends on a title isn't respect. It's recognition. And those are two very different things." Lieutenant Harris looked genuinely ashamed. "I should have asked your name." Naomi met his eyes. "You should have asked everyone's name." The words were not spoken as criticism. They sounded more like guidance. That somehow made them even harder to hear. A dispatcher standing near the hallway quietly whispered to another officer. "She never once complained." The other officer nodded. "Not once." Naomi looked around the busy station. The ringing phones. The officers rushing between assignments. The worried families waiting patiently. The exhausted detectives beginning another long day. She didn't see bad people. She saw good professionals trapped inside routines they no longer questioned. And routines, she knew from years in tactical command, often revealed far more than intentions ever could. Commander Hayes finally gestured toward the conference hallway. The leadership team is assembled upstairs. Naomi smiled politely. They can wait another minute. She turned back toward the reception desk one last time. Toward the same plastic chair where she had quietly sat for 47 minutes. Then she spoke the sentence no one inside the station would ever forget. I haven't evaluated your procedures yet. I've only experienced your welcome. And somehow, that felt far more important. Captain Naomi Brooks followed Commander Robert Hayes through the hallway without saying another word. Behind them, the station slowly came back to life. Phones rang again. Printers hummed. Dispatch radios crackled across the room. But the conversations were different now. Quieter. More careful. Lieutenant Daniel Harris remained standing near the reception desk long after Naomi disappeared upstairs. He stared at the empty plastic chair where she had spent nearly an hour waiting. It looked ordinary. Just another molded seat bolted against the wall. Yet somehow, it had become the most important place in the building. Officer Melissa Grant walked beside him. I've never seen Commander Hayes salute anyone like that. Harris exhaled slowly. Neither have I. She hesitated before asking, did you know she was coming? He shook his head. I knew we were getting a new tactical standards captain. I just didn't know. He glanced toward the hallway. It was her. Across the lobby, two rookie officers quietly replayed the morning in their minds. One finally spoke. I thought she was here to report a stolen purse. The other lowered his eyes. I thought she was waiting for somebody in custody. Neither admitted the thought that bothered them most. Not once had either imagined she might outrank nearly everyone inside the building. Upstairs, Naomi entered the conference room. More than 20 supervisors immediately stood. District captains, sergeants, training officers, detective commanders. Each greeted her respectfully. Commander Hayes made the introductions. This is Captain Naomi Brooks. 23 years in law enforcement. Former patrol officer. Former hostage negotiator. Former SWAT team leader. Recipient of the Medal of Valor. Graduate of the National Tactical Leadership Academy. The room listened in silence. Hayes continued. She has led over 300 high-risk operations, without losing a single civilian. Several officers exchanged impressed looks. Naomi smiled modestly. The numbers don't tell the whole story. They never do. She set her black folder on the conference table. Inside were no disciplinary forms. No performance charts. No lists of violations. Only a small notebook. The same notebook she had carried into the lobby. She opened it. The first page contained only observations. No names. No accusations. Just moments. No greeting, no eye contact, no introduction, no explanation for the delay. She gently closed the notebook. These aren't failures. They're habits. The supervisors looked at one another. Naomi continued. The dangerous thing about habits is that eventually they become invisible. She walked toward the large window overlooking the station parking lot. Morning sunlight reflected across dozens of patrol cars, waiting for the next emergency. When I was a rookie patrol officer, my field training officer taught me something I never forgot. She smiled faintly. He said, people usually remember how you made them feel long before they remember what you said. The room remained completely silent. I've responded to shootings. I've negotiated hostage situations. I've served warrants before sunrise. She turned back toward the group. But do you know what most citizens remember? No one answered. They remember walking through our front door. They remember whether someone looked up. They remember whether someone smiled. They remember whether someone treated them like a problem. Or like a person. Downstairs, Lieutenant Harris slowly approached the reception counter again. He noticed something he had overlooked for years. The chairs were arranged so visitors faced a blank wall instead of the front desk. The reception window remained half-closed. A faded sign reading "Please wait to be called" hung behind scratched plexiglass. He had passed those details thousands of times. He had simply stopped seeing them. He quietly removed the sign. Officer Grant looked over. "What are you doing?" Harris studied the empty waiting area. "I'm starting to understand." He walked around the counter and moved one of the chairs so it faced the desk instead of the wall. It was a tiny change. Almost insignificant. But somehow, it made the room feel less like a checkpoint and more like a place where people came to be heard. "Upstairs, Captain." Naomi Brooks looked around the conference room one final time. "I wasn't sent here to inspect your tactics." She paused just long enough for every supervisor to meet her eyes. "I was sent here to strengthen your culture. And culture begins long before anyone puts on body armor." The room fell silent once again. For the first time that morning, no one was thinking about rank. They were thinking about responsibility. The conference room remained unusually quiet after Captain Naomi Brooks finished speaking. No one reached for a phone. No one shuffled papers. Even the veteran commanders who had spent decades leading investigations seemed more interested in listening than talking. Naomi looked around the room before taking her seat. "I know what many of you are thinking." A few supervisors exchanged nervous smiles. "You expected today's meeting to begin with policies." She folded her hands calmly. Instead, it began downstairs. Commander Robert Hayes leaned back in his chair. "That was intentional." Naomi nodded. "Very intentional." She tapped the black notebook resting in front of her. "This isn't an inspection. It's an opportunity." Lieutenant Daniel Harris had quietly entered the conference room moments earlier. He chose a seat near the back. Not because anyone told him to, because he still felt embarrassed. Naomi noticed him immediately but said nothing. Instead, she projected a single photograph onto the large presentation screen. It wasn't a tactical operation. It wasn't a crime scene. It wasn't even a police officer. The image showed nothing more than the front entrance of the station. "What do you see?" A captain answered first. "Our front lobby." Naomi smiled. "What else?" Silence. She clicked to the next photograph. The same lobby. Empty. Plastic chairs. Reception counter. Bullet-resistant glass. Nothing remarkable. Finally, Sergeant Elena Morris spoke. "A place where people come when they're having one of the worst days of their lives." Naomi smiled warmly. "Exactly." She looked around the room. Almost no one walks through those doors because they're having a wonderful morning. Someone has been robbed. Someone has lost a child. Someone has been assaulted. Someone is terrified. Her voice remained calm, but every sentence carried weight. "They don't arrive needing our authority first. They arrive needing our humanity." The room became completely still. Naomi turned off the projector. "When I entered this building today, no one broke department policy." Several officers looked surprised. "No one insulted me. No one yelled. No one acted aggressively." She paused. "And yet, I felt invisible." Those 3 words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Lieutenant Harris lowered his eyes. For the first time in 20 years, he remembered his own first day wearing a badge. Back then, his training officer had told him something simple. Never forget what it feels like to be the person asking for help. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. Commander Hayes quietly stood. "I'd like everyone to know something." The room turned toward him. When Captain Brooks asked permission to conduct today's evaluation, she requested one condition. He smiled slightly. She refused an escort. Several supervisors looked confused. Hayes continued. "She parked 3 blocks away. She walked here alone. She carried her own bag. She removed every visible sign of rank." He looked around the room. Because she wanted every interaction to be genuine. No one spoke. Naomi quietly added, "I wasn't testing individuals. I was measuring culture." She walked slowly toward the conference room window overlooking the station lobby below. From upstairs, officers looked small as they answered phones and welcomed visitors. She noticed something different. Lieutenant Harris had already moved the waiting chairs. Officer Melissa Grant now greeted every person who entered before they reached the counter. A young mother carrying a sleeping toddler had just walked inside. Officer Grant immediately smiled. Good morning. How can we help you today? The exhausted mother's shoulders visibly relaxed. Naomi smiled almost imperceptibly. Change had already begun. Not because someone had been punished. Because someone had become aware. She turned back toward the leadership team. My predecessor left me an interesting quote. She opened the notebook and read aloud. A department's reputation isn't built during emergencies. She looked up. It's built in the first 30 seconds after someone walks through the front door. No one wrote notes. No one needed to. Those words were already being remembered. Naomi closed the notebook. Tomorrow, I'll begin reviewing tactical readiness. A few commanders straightened in their seats. Then she smiled. But today, I've already learned the most important lesson this building could teach me. She looked directly at Lieutenant Harris. Not with judgment. With hope. The strongest officers aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones willing to recognize them. Before someone else has to suffer because of them. The room remained silent. Not from fear. But because everyone understood the evaluation had never really been about procedures. It had always been about people. The following morning, the atmosphere inside the 12th District Police Station felt noticeably different. The building was just as busy. Dispatch radios still crackled with urgency. Detectives hurried through the hallways carrying case files. Patrol officers prepared for another long shift across the city. But beneath the familiar rhythm, there was something new. People were paying attention. Lieutenant Daniel Harris unlocked the front doors at precisely 7 o'clock. Before taking his place behind the reception counter, he paused. For the first time in years, he looked around the lobby as though he had never seen it before. Fresh flowers now sat on the reception desk. The scratch sign that once read "Please wait to be called" was gone. The chairs had been rearranged into a welcoming semicircle instead of facing a blank wall. Even the harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced overnight with softer LED fixtures. Small changes. Almost invisible. Yet somehow, the room no longer felt cold. Officer Melissa Grant approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've been here since 6? Harris accepted one with a grateful smile. Couldn't sleep. Melissa nodded knowingly. I don't think many of us did. Neither mentioned Captain Naomi Brooks. They didn't have to. Her quiet visit had become the station's only conversation. At exactly 7:15, the front doors opened. An elderly Hispanic woman stepped inside using a metal cane. She looked anxious. Before she had taken 3 steps, Harris walked around the reception counter. Good morning, ma'am. My name is Lieutenant Harris. He smiled warmly. How may we help you today? The woman's tense shoulders relaxed almost immediately. I think someone has been using my bank account. I'm not sure what to do. Harris gently guided her toward one of the chairs. We'll figure it out together. Officer Grant quietly brought the woman a bottle of water. No one had instructed them to do this. No new policy required it. They simply remembered how invisible someone could feel. Upstairs, Captain Naomi Brooks watched through the second-floor observation window. Commander Robert Hayes stood beside her. They're all ready. Changing. Naomi smiled softly. No. They're remembering. Hayes looked at her curiously. The difference. Naomi folded her arms. Most officers join this profession because they wanted to help people. Sometimes the workload makes them forget why. She watched Harris kneel beside the elderly woman so they could speak at eye level. You don't teach compassion. You uncover it. A few minutes later, the leadership meeting resumed. Naomi placed several blank index cards on the conference table. I have an exercise. The supervisors exchanged curious looks. Don't write your rank. Don't write your assignment. Don't write your years of service. She paused. Instead, write about the first person who ever made you believe policing could change someone's life. Silence settled across the room. Pens slowly touched paper. One captain wrote about his grandfather. Another remembered the officer who found her after she became lost at 6 years old. A detective described the patrolwoman who comforted his mother after a house fire. Lieutenant Harris stared at his blank card for nearly a minute. Finally, he began writing. Officer James Whitaker, my field training officer. He knew every homeless veteran by name. He told me respect should never depend on someone's appearance. Harris stopped writing. His eyes remained fixed on the final sentence. He had once believed those words without question. Somewhere along the years, paperwork had become more important than people. Speed had replaced conversation. Routine had replaced awareness. Across the room, Naomi quietly collected the cards. She didn't read them aloud. She simply stacked them together. Every one of you came into law enforcement carrying a reason. She looked around the room. Not a rank. A reason. Her voice remained gentle. The badge doesn't create character. It reveals it. Commander Hayes smiled. I've worked with Captain Brooks for almost 15 years. He looked toward the supervisors. She has led hostage rescues, served high-risk warrants, and commanded tactical teams under fire. He paused. But I've never seen her more determined than she was yesterday morning, sitting quietly in that plastic chair. The room fell silent once again. Naomi looked through the conference room window toward the station lobby below. The elderly woman was leaving now. She stopped at the front door, turned back, and smiled gratefully at Harris before walking outside. Naomi smiled too. No medals had been awarded. No arrests had been made. No headlines would ever tell the story of that morning. Yet, she knew something important had happened. Because real leadership wasn't measured by how people behaved when someone important walked into the room. It was measured by how they treated the next stranger who did. 1 week later, Captain Naomi Brooks gathered the entire station inside the district's training auditorium. Nearly every chair was occupied. Patrol officers, detectives, dispatchers, civilian staff, supervisors. Even the maintenance crew had been invited. No one knew exactly what to expect. Most assumed Captain Brooks would begin introducing new policies. Others quietly wondered if disciplinary actions were coming. Instead, Naomi walked onto the stage carrying only the same black notebook she had brought on her first day. No presentation slides. No thick policy manuals. No stack of evaluation reports. Just one notebook. Commander Robert Hayes took a seat in the back row without saying a word. He wanted everyone to hear her exactly as she intended. Naomi stood behind the podium for several seconds before speaking. When I accepted this assignment, people asked me what I planned to change. She looked slowly across the audience. I told them I wasn't coming here to change people. I was coming here to remind them who they already were. The room remained perfectly still. Naomi opened the notebook. Several officers expected to hear a list of mistakes. Instead, she read something entirely different. Officer Melissa Grant immediately helped an elderly veteran. Melissa looked surprised. Dispatcher Lisa Carter stayed 20 minutes after her shift to comfort a frightened child. Lisa blinked. She had forgotten about that night. Detective Ramirez quietly bought dinner for a domestic violence victim who had nowhere else to go. Ramirez lowered his head. Naomi closed the notebook. I've spent the past week watching, and I've discovered something important. She smiled warmly. There is extraordinary kindness inside this building. The audience relaxed slightly. But kindness hidden behind routine helps fewer people than kindness expressed every day. Lieutenant Daniel Harris listened quietly from the third row. He realized she hadn't mentioned his mistake. Not once. She had every opportunity to embarrass him publicly. She chose not to. Naomi stepped away from the podium. When I sat in the lobby last Monday, I wasn't angry. Several officers looked at one another. I wasn't offended. She paused. I was curious. Curious. The word echoed through the auditorium. I wanted to understand what your citizens experience before they ever meet the officer assigned to their case. She looked toward the reception staff. And what I learned had very little to do with procedures. It had everything to do with presence. She walked slowly across the stage. People notice when we avoid eye contact. They notice when we never smile. They notice when we speak without listening. Her voice softened. They also notice when one officer simply says, "Good morning." A quiet silence settled over the room. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. Naomi continued. Authority earns compliance. Respect earns trust. And trust is what allows policing to work. Commander Hayes smiled quietly. Those words perfectly summarized everything Naomi had practiced throughout her career. She stopped beside the first row. When I was 12 years old, my mother took me into a police station after someone vandalized our neighborhood church. The audience listened closely. I don't remember the report. I don't remember the investigation. She smiled faintly. But I still remember the officer who knelt down, smiled, and asked me if I was all right. She looked around the room. That officer probably forgot the conversation before the end of his shift. I remembered it for 20 years. The room became completely silent. Every officer understood. Sometimes the smallest moments lasted the longest. Naomi closed her notebook one final time. I've completed my first evaluation. Several supervisors straightened in their seats. She smiled. And the results are encouraging. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with this department. There are only habits that deserve better awareness. Lieutenant Harris slowly stood. Captain. Every eye turned toward him. I owe you something. Naomi looked at him calmly. You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant. Harris shook his head. I do. He took a deep breath. I forgot why I became a police officer. He looked around the auditorium. And your visit reminded me. Several officers quietly nodded. No applause followed. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter. More honest. Naomi smiled. Then my first week has already been successful. She glanced toward the audience one final time. If this moment touched your heart, remember that respect doesn't begin with a badge. It begins with the way we choose to see one another. Share this story with someone who believes kindness is never a weakness, because one simple act of dignity can change an entire community. Outside the station windows, the morning sun reflected across rows of patrol cars. Inside, something far more important than policy had changed. People had begun seeing each other again. 2 weeks after Captain Naomi Brooks first walked into the 12th District wearing a gray hoodie, the station looked almost identical from the outside. The same brick building stood beneath the Chicago skyline. The same patrol cars lined the parking lot. The same officers hurried through the entrance before sunrise. Yet inside, everything felt different. The reception counter no longer acted as a barrier. Officers greeted visitors before they reached the desk. Dispatchers smiled more often. Detectives who once rushed past frightened citizens now stopped long enough to ask a simple question. Asterisk, are you okay? Asterisk, small moments. Tiny changes. But together, they had transformed the atmosphere of the station. That Thursday morning, Captain Naomi Brooks stood quietly on the second-floor balcony overlooking the lobby. She carried her familiar black notebook. Commander Robert Hayes joined her. You've barely written anything this week. Naomi smiled. That's because I've spent more time listening than evaluating. Hayes folded his arms. So, what's your conclusion? Naomi watched as Lieutenant Daniel Harris walked around the reception desk to greet a nervous teenage boy who had just entered with his mother. Instead of pointing toward the waiting chairs, Harris introduced himself first. Good morning. My name is Lieutenant Harris. What can we do for you today? The boy's frightened expression softened almost immediately. Naomi looked back toward Hayes. My conclusion is simple. Culture changes when leaders become examples. Hayes nodded quietly. I was hoping you'd say that. At that moment, the auditorium doors opened downstairs. The district's monthly community partnership meeting was about to begin. Dozens of neighborhood residents filled the room. Local pastors, teachers, business owners, youth mentors, veterans, parents. Everyone had been invited to meet the officers serving their community. Captain Brooks wasn't scheduled to speak. She planned to sit quietly in the audience. But as Commander Hayes stepped to the podium, he surprised everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize someone. He turned toward Naomi. For 23 years, Captain. Naomi Brooks has led some of the most dangerous tactical operations in this city. He paused. Yet the greatest lesson she has ever taught this department happened while sitting quietly in a plastic chair. The audience smiled softly. Several officers lowered their eyes. Hayes continued. She reminded us that leadership isn't measured by how many people salute you. It's measured by how many people feel respected after meeting you. Without warning, the entire room stood. One by one. Officers, detectives, dispatchers, community members. No one had been instructed to do so. The applause began quietly, then slowly grew louder. Lieutenant Harris felt emotion tighten his throat. He remembered the woman he had asked to wait without even learning her name. Now he understood why that moment had changed him forever. When the applause finally faded, Harris stepped onto the stage. The room became silent once more. He faced Naomi. "Captain, I've spent 20 years believing experience automatically made me a better officer." He paused. "I was wrong." His voice trembled slightly. "You reminded me that every citizen deserves the same respect, whether they're wearing a business suit, a military uniform, or a gray hoodie." A few people quietly wiped away tears. Harris looked directly at Naomi. "I can't change how I welcomed you that morning, but I promise, no one who walks through our doors will ever feel invisible again." Naomi smiled with quiet warmth. She extended her hand. Instead of shaking it, Harris stood at attention, then offered her a formal salute. For a brief second, Naomi looked genuinely surprised. She returned the salute with equal respect. The audience erupted into applause once again. Commander Hayes watched silently from the side of the stage. This wasn't about rank anymore. It wasn't about promotions. It wasn't about authority. It was about character. Naomi stepped toward the microphone. She looked across the room filled with officers and citizens standing together. Then she spoke softly. "I didn't come here to teach you how to wear a badge. I came here to remind all of us that every badge represents a promise. A promise that every person who walks through these doors will be seen before they're judged." If this story touched your heart, remember that true respect is never earned by rank alone. It is earned through kindness, humility, and the courage to treat every person with dignity. Share the story with someone who believes that real leadership begins with humanity. ****. 3 weeks after Captain Naomi Brooks quietly walked into the 12th District wearing nothing more than a gray hoodie and a backpack, the department received an unexpected visitor. No one recognized her. She was an elderly African-American woman dressed in a simple cardigan, comfortable walking shoes, and carrying a worn leather purse. She entered the station slowly, glancing around as if uncertain where to go. Without hesitation, Officer Melissa Grant walked around the reception counter. She smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Melissa. How may I help you today?" The woman smiled with visible relief. "I think I may have lost my wallet." Melissa gently guided her toward a chair. "Let's see what we can do." Lieutenant Daniel Harris noticed the interaction from across the lobby. He quietly joined them. "Would you like some water while we make a report?" The woman nodded gratefully. "That would be wonderful." Within moments, another officer brought her a bottle of water. A dispatcher offered tissues. A detective searched nearby lost property records. No one asked what she looked like before deciding how much help she deserved. No one assumed anything. Everyone simply saw a person who needed assistance. Upstairs, Captain Naomi Brooks watched the scene unfold through the observation window. Commander Robert Hayes smiled. Quite a difference from 3 weeks ago. Naomi folded her arms thoughtfully. "No, this is who they always were. They just remembered." Hayes looked downstairs again. "You know, I've been thinking about that morning." Naomi smiled. "The gray hoodie." He laughed quietly. "I almost told you not to do it." She looked at him curiously. "Why didn't you?" "Because deep down, I knew you'd see something the rest of us had stopped noticing." Before Naomi could answer, Officer Melissa escorted the elderly woman toward the exit. The woman's wallet had been found. A college student had turned it in less than an hour earlier. The woman hugged Melissa tightly. "Thank you. I was so frightened when I walked in." Melissa smiled. "I'm glad you didn't have to stay frightened." As the woman walked outside, Naomi quietly wiped away a small tear. Commander Hayes noticed. "You all right?" She nodded. "My mother." Hayes waited. "She used to tell me, you can measure a person's character by how they treat someone who has nothing to offer them." She watched the front doors slowly close. She was right. That afternoon, the district held one final staff gathering before Naomi's assignment officially ended. The auditorium filled once again. This time, there were no speeches planned. No awards. No presentations. Commander Hayes simply invited anyone who wished to speak. To everyone's surprise, Officer Melissa Grant walked to the microphone first. She looked nervous. "I've been a police officer for 11 years. She smiled toward Naomi. "I thought professionalism meant following procedures perfectly." She paused. "Captain Brooks reminded me. That professionalism also sounds like kindness." The audience applauded softly. Next came Detective Ramirez. "I've solved hundreds of cases. But my daughter asked me something last week." He smiled. She said, "Dad, are you nice to people before you help them?" A ripple of gentle laughter filled the room. Ramirez looked toward Naomi. I realized that question mattered more than any statistic. Finally, Lieutenant Harris stood. He carried something in his hands. The same faded sign that once hung behind the reception counter. "Please wait to be called." He held it up for everyone to see. "This sign hung in our lobby for almost 12 years. He looked around the room. "I walked past it thousands of times. I never questioned what it said." He slowly set it on the floor. Then, reaching behind the podium, he lifted a new sign. Simple. Elegant. It contained only 6 words. "Welcome. How can we help you?" The audience immediately rose to its feet. Not because of a sign. Because everyone understood what it represented. Naomi smiled through tears. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't dramatic. Sometimes they were 6 simple words that changed how an entire community felt walking through one front door. She looked across the room one final time. "I'll leave this district tomorrow. But what you've built doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every person who chooses compassion before assumption." If this story touched your heart, remember that every conversation is an opportunity to make someone feel seen. Share this story with someone who believes kindness is the strongest form of leadership, because respect begins long before anyone learns your name. ***. 6 months later, Captain Naomi Brooks returned to the 12th District Police Station. This time, she arrived wearing her navy blue command uniform. Silver captain's bars rested neatly on her shoulders. Her badge reflected the soft morning sunlight as she stepped from her vehicle. Unlike her first visit, no one failed to notice her. Officer Melissa Grant opened the front door before Naomi reached it. "Good morning, Captain Brooks. It's wonderful to have you back." Naomi smiled warmly. "It's good to be back." As she stepped into the lobby, she paused. The building felt familiar. Yet somehow, entirely new. The reception area no longer resembled the station she had entered half a year earlier. Natural light filled the room through newly cleaned windows. Fresh plants sat near the entrance. Children's coloring books rested on a small table beside comfortable chairs. The atmosphere no longer felt intimidating. It felt welcoming. Most importantly, no one sat alone. Every visitor was greeted within moments of entering. Lieutenant Daniel Harris walked toward her. His smile came easily now. Not because she outranked him. Because he genuinely respected her. "Welcome home, Captain." Naomi shook his hand. "You've done remarkable work." Harris looked around the lobby. "We all have." Just then, the front doors opened again. A young black mother entered carrying an infant in one arm while holding the hand of a frightened little boy with the other. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. His eyes started nervously around the room. Before the family had taken 3 steps inside, Officer Melissa knelt to the child's eye level. "Hi there. My name is Melissa." She smiled gently. "You're safe here." The little boy hesitated for a moment. Then, he smiled back. Naomi quietly watched the exchange. A memory returned instantly. She saw herself at 12 years old, standing inside another police station after vandals had damaged her family's church. She remembered being frightened. She remembered feeling invisible. But most of all, she remembered one officer kneeling to speak to her with kindness. That single moment had inspired her entire career. Now, she was watching. that same kindness continue through someone else. Commander Robert Hayes approached carrying a framed photograph. I think this belongs here. Naomi looked down. It was a picture taken from the district's community picnic held several weeks earlier. Police officers stood beside neighborhood children. Detectives laughed with local business owners. Dispatchers served food alongside firefighters. No ranks. No titles. Just people. Beneath the photograph, a small bronze plaque had been mounted. It read, "Service begins with respect." Naomi stood quietly for several seconds. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Lieutenant Harris finally broke the silence. You know, we almost hung another plaque. Naomi smiled curiously. What did it say? Harris laughed softly. Please wait to be called. Everyone nearby chuckled. He shook his head. I can't believe we ever thought that was the right message. Naomi looked toward the front entrance. Another citizen had just walked inside. Officer Melissa greeted him immediately. Without hesitation. Without judgment. Exactly as she always did. Commander Hayes folded his arms. You accomplished everything you came here to do. Naomi gently shook her head. No. I simply reminded people of something they'd almost forgotten. She looked across the station one final time. The real work was done by every officer who chose to change. Outside, the American flag moved gently in the autumn breeze. Inside, phones continued ringing. Officers answered calls. Detectives prepared reports. Life carried on as it always had. But now, every person who stepped through the front doors was welcomed before they were questioned. Heard before they were judged. Seen before they were assumed. As Naomi walked toward the exit, the little boy she had noticed earlier suddenly called after her. Excuse me, Captain. She turned. The child smiled shyly. When I grow up, I want to be a police officer. Naomi smiled with quiet pride. I hope you do. Because this badge needs people who never forget how it feels to stand where you are today. She stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight. The station doors closed gently behind her. For a moment, she looked back at the building. 6 months earlier, she had entered those same doors carrying only a backpack, a notebook, and a simple hope. She left knowing that real leadership had never been about rank. It had always been about helping people feel valued before they ever learned your title. And perhaps the greatest victory of all was that no one entering the 12th district would ever again wonder if they mattered. The end.